that money cannot be a debt, or that money cannot be credit, without my original, long preceding proof that any purported economy subject to interest inevitably terminates itself under inevitably fatal sums of artificial debt. But so, it is no more than a blatant, inexcusable misunderstanding of mere 11th hour imitators, then, to merely assert that money purportedly cannot be a debt, or that money purportedly cannot be credit. Because in fact, there is no injury whatsoever in justifiable obligations to pay and to retire principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property. Just one obvious stupidity of these many imitators, therefore, is that they have misunderstood from my own work that debt is our problem, versus that irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest is the actual cause of terminal failure, because it is the unjustifiable imposition of interest which perpetually multiplies artificial indebtedness into terminal sums of artificial debt. Justifiable obligations to pay no more than principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property, in fact, impose no offense whatsoever. In fact, by denying us the only justifiable implementation of actual credit, in which no more than the principal is paid at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property, as is the case in the long pre-existing arguments of one mathematically perfected economy, you would deny us the very opportunity to prosper to the full extent of our capacities, because if, as these purported alternate solutions claim, if these purported alternate non-credit or non-debt solutions likewise solved circulatory inflation and deflation as they only claim, then eradication of genuine credit precludes, just for instance, both the market and therefore the production of the actual creditor who produces a home and could accept an immutable promissory obligation under mathematically perfected economy and under mathematically perfected economy only. How or why? Because, for instance, a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan cost us overall only $1,000 per year, or $83.33 per month under mathematically perfected economy. By restoring the right of the people to issue their promissory obligations without exploitation, by certifying and enforcing creditworthiness, and even automating payment, we enable a newlywed couple, for instance, to take possession of a new home for $83.33 per month. Neither the fact of their justifiable and enforceable credit, nor the fact of the resultant obligation to pay for the home as they consume of it, are any offense against us whatsoever. Nor can the costs of our production to ourselves be reduced any more than to the actual principal which the actual creditor is paid in full from the outset of this natural, unexploited arrangement. It is not debt or credit which engenders terminal sums of debt, and so no mere imitator who so misunderstands what they stole from my work that they propose spending money into circulation or purported non-credit money is any genuine advocate of solution at all. On the contrary, Not only do they solve nothing by these propositions, they propose a preposterous obstruction to prosperity, which itself disproves their purported authority. And the delusions of their 11th hour attention do not even stop there. For in each case that I have carefully disproven these contending propositions, which only compete without qualification with the very work they only stole impotently and divisively from, their careless misunderstandings impose further critical problems which we ourselves, unfortunately, must too understand now if we are to discern actual solution from preposterous, ever-proliferating plagiarism. How preposterous, even, is this prolific plagiarism? The advocates of the dangerous and irreconcilable proposition of spending money into circulation even regularly cite a purported historic example of Benjamin Franklin perfecting economy and spending money into circulation. The very source they cite, in fact, is my very own work. The very source they cite, in fact, is my 1975 Parable of Perfect Economy, which is a mere story, a fictional historic event which never happened, in which mathematically perfected economy is explained in one of two purposely conflicting cases, and in which mathematically perfected economy is explained in the words of Mike Montagne, original author of Mathematically Perfected Economy, issued from the utterly fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. When these preposterous imitators thus so erroneously cite Franklin as validating a proposition of perfected economy, in fact they inadvertently commend the work they stole from. But worse, or even more preposterously, hoping only to avoid detection of the plagiarism of which they are still so blatantly guilty, by ignorantly attributing the work of Mike Montagne to Benjamin Franklin, they cite a purposely embedded fault which, although it is certainly inspiring in its proposition of funding government without taxation, is inherently flawed in its differences from the first case of the natural life cycle of promissory obligations. This embedded fault, which these preposterous imitators perpetually prove they fail to understand, was a vital vehicle of teaching. Indeed, in this parable, in this mere fictional story which is not history at all, but instead is merely a vehicle for teaching, I have Franklin spending money into circulation in the second flawed case. Explanations of this conflicting case, which were usually undetected by the audience, were removed after Jacques Jaquerin unwittingly plagiarized my parable too, as if it were actual history. The reason for this second embedded case, however, was to test the audience's understanding. It comprised a purposed embedded opportunity, in fact, to explain since almost 40 years ago the inherent faults of merely spending money into circulation. In fact, too, then, present instances of my same arguments prevail over the same recent 11th hour advocates of purported alternate solutions, who themselves regularly concede, in accord with my original arguments, that it is impossible to solve inflation and deflation without an inseparable obligation, in fact, to pay every unit of circulation out of circulation. Thus these preposterous imitators even concede that in fact there is no such thing as a solution which merely spends purported non-credit money into circulation. But how wrong can literally millions of web pages now be? To propose an already disproven proposition of solution, citing no more than a parable, which is not even an historic event, claiming that the very words of the author, issued through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin nonetheless, concur in a proposition which is disproven by the very parable itself. Thus we, the eventually united people of the world, must ourselves understand the disparities of pretended solution by the only facts which can prove solution, if we are ever to overcome our real adversary, the usurer. This program is broadcast regularly at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 p.m. UTC Ireland Time, from TNS Radio in Ireland, tnsradio.com, Tirnassar, land of the free. Original material, analyses, and solution, as always, are copyright and trademarked by yours truly, Mike Montagne. All rights reserved. In part 1 of this review of Inside Job, we carefully differentiated the limited perspective of this documentary from a deeper, comprehensive perspective, reappraising the events before us in respect to our understanding of the root cause of inevitable failure, and in regard to our further understanding of one and one only solution. This more comprehensive perspective, therefore, necessarily considers the recent crimes of the purported financial world, not just by the obvious improprieties exposed by the documentary. The reason it is so important, however, to understand the larger, overall crimes in the broader terms of our proofs of inevitable failure and singular solution is that if we pretended we understood the present behaviors only as the acts of looters, no more than gutting every republic to its last days, we are misled to believe wrongly that we might resolve these final acts of a terminal system of exploitation as separate incidents, which we might set ourselves against in such ways as believing wrongly that we could merely outlaw or ostensibly even justly limit unearned taking. The case we are building by this review, however, is that it is in fact impossible to solve the issues which confront us by merely presuming we can limit unearned taking to some ostensibly justifiable extent. The reason we could never truly serve our purposes by so disposing ourselves, as we have argued so far in this review, is that it is the fundamental obfuscation of the currency which inevitably precipitates in pressures which not only manifest in the present crimes, but which in fact too, in perpetually multiplying artificial, falsified debt upon us, perpetually exacerbate the pressures of further criminal activity. In other words, after all property is already collateralized, and while we yet must assume further debt merely to maintain a vital circulation, an artificial impetus exists